All right, everybody, you've come to the wrong place at the wrong time, and that must mean it's the wrong stuff. Guy Denton, how's it hanging?
Isn't that always the way, Matt? You try and live your life the right way, but you always end up back in the wrong place. As clearly the
Indeed.
country is intent on doing, based on the state of the evolving state of the presidential race.
One person maybe is at the right place at the right time, and that is Kamala Harris, Guy. It happened pretty quickly that, since the last time we talked, I think, right? Joe Biden announced he's not running. It feels like a million years ago, but no. He's not going to run he's not going to be the Republican nominee in 2024. Kamala Harris, he endorsed her. She quickly emerges as the presumptive nominee. And I have to tell you, man, I was a little surprised because she's been this awkward, kind of phony, cringy candidate in the past. She seems to have gotten her groove back.
You can't log on to the internet without seeing one of her ads and being bombarded with her latest campaign sloganeering. But I agree with you. The substance of the ads is terrible, and I'm sure we'll come to that in one way or another as we start looking at clips. But her tone is far less awkward and far less unnerving and uncanny valley-ish than I expected it would be. But of course,
Yeah, suddenly
we'll have to see whether that can endure over the course of the next 100 days.
suddenly she seems competent, she seems confident, she seems authentic. And so let's go now. This was her first rally. I believe it was in Milwaukee. They ended up using this clip for her TV ad. We'll talk about it on the other end.
Do we believe in freedom? Do we believe in opportunity? Do we believe in the promise of America? And are we ready to fight for it? And when we fight, we win. God bless you. God bless the United States of America.
I don't know if she can sustain this enthusiasm and if she can go, what is the old construction sign, X number of days without it since the last accident or whatever. But there's excitement, and that was missing. That was missing. There was no excitement for Joe Biden. It's an obvious point, but there is excitement now, and I think it matters. But do you think do you need a cult of personality in this era to compete with Donald Trump?
Well, I think you make a good point, but that's actually an interesting question when you consider that Trump's entire campaign is built on cult of personality, and Kamala could quite easily build a competing campaign also on cult of personality. However, cult is really the operative word in both cases because these remain two hugely unpopular people and two people who are deeply disliked by the majority of the American population. The question, I think, for both of them is, can they restrain? I mean, this has always been the question for Trump. We've talked about it before. Can he restrain his worst impulses could he restrain his worst impulses to make Biden look chaotic by comparison? Was the question of the race until he dropped out. Now the question for Trump is, can he essentially do the same thing to Kamala Harris, but can he also avoid debasing himself and making her seem poised and dignified in comparison? Her challenge is, can she restrain her awkwardness? Can she restrain her bizarre tics? Can she suppress the air of artificiality, artifice that's surrounded her for the last few years and it's made her very unpopular by every identifiable metric? If she can, and if she can focus on building a winning coalition, then she could quite easily tip the margins over and beat Trump in November.
You might have noticed she is not running on democracy the same way that Joe Biden was. It's been rebranded as freedom. Fits that song, her sort of theme song. But I think it also, the abortion issue better fits into that rubric of freedom. Now, you and I, at least I'll speak for myself, I'm pro-life with exceptions, so I'm probably not a target Kamala Harris voter. But I do think that is an issue that she believes she can win on. And there is some reason to believe that young people are now much more motivated and excited than they were just like a week ago.
No, I think that's true. I think the danger, the jeopardy is that Kamala's track record of campaigning isn't exactly stellar. And all you need to do is think 2019 feels like a distant memory now. I mean, even just based on what's happened in the last 2 months, never mind the last 5 years. But in 2019, she did an absolutely dismal job of campaigning. She couldn't even make it to Iowa. Her numbers were so poor and her performance was so poor. I'm skeptical that things will have improved considerably enough for her to do much of a better job this time. However, I do think you're right that if she can tap into a lot of the most significant issues of the election and build a wave of momentum around them, that will work well. That can only work in her favor, especially if Trump is incapable of arguing on a policy platform of his own and falls back on his old approach of just endless personal attacks.
I mean, it is possible that Kamala has improved, or that for whatever reason the stars have aligned and this is her moment. I think so. There's one theory that says Kamala looked so bad in 2019 because she was authentically Kamala the cop, the prosecutor. But then the political zeitgeist, particularly on the left, where she's running for a Democratic primary in 2020, after in the wake of the George Floyd murder, being Kamala the cop was bad. So she had to reinvent herself. That's where the inauthenticity comes from. But since then, the political world has changed. She's not running in a primary. She's running in a general election. And she's had 3 or 4 years to improve and maybe learn from her mistakes. So maybe it's possible she actually is better than she used to be.
I mean, I don't think you're wrong when you consider who does she need to influence, right? Who does she need to win? You touched on young people, and I think that is a good point, but I hadn't even considered that this young people obviously like energy, they like enthusiasm, they like big movements, and she's far better positioned to create one of those than Biden ever was, as he shuffled out on stage and desperately tried to hang on when he delivered speeches. But also, who else does she need to influence? Women, suburban voters, suburban women, black voters, and she's infinitely better positioned to influence those voters than Trump is. And the proof of that, I mean, just to give one example, there's a study that just came out from Michigan that showed that in recent weeks, Trump had captured a lot of support among black voters as Biden's, not just in wake of the assassination attempt, but as Biden seemed to be palpably declining before our eyes. But when Kamala became, when Biden stood down and Kamala became the presumptive nominee, all of that support disappeared, and now he gains no support compared to Kamala and even compared to RFK. So that was in Michigan, which is going to be one of the essential states for deciding the outcome of the race. So if she can build on that and build that momentum and cling on to it and not embarrass herself as Trump is guaranteed to, she could quite easily, not easily, but she could pull out a win. It's definitely possible.
Yeah. And, there are the memification of Kamala, the TikTok stuff, her dancing. There's a sort of a hip quality that Biden, let's be honest, just couldn't capture. You try it with the dark Brandon thing, but it's not, you're not going to make fetch happen. Guy, you're young. What is this brat thing? Do you have any idea? Can you explain this to me? Do you know anything about this? Brat?
I try and avoid all forms of social media, so no, I've heard of this, but it's kind of a mystery to me. Do you have a clip?
I do not have a clip, but let me run this other clip by you. Here's one. You and I don't agree with Kamala on a lot. Let's be honest. But here's something. This is an old clip of her, I believe, that's been dredged up to make her look bad. I think it makes her look good. It's her talking about the youths of America. Here we go.
And it's a specific phase of life. Remember, age is more than a chronological fact. What else do we know about this population, 18 through 24? They are stupid. That is why we put them in dormitories. And they have a resident assistant. They make really bad decisions.
I'd vote for that, Like that should be, I mean, I think she would get crushed if that were her main campaign theme, but she would have my vote.
It's such a funny contrast to see that clip in comparison to the clip you played earlier, because it really is. I mean, granted, we're talking about examples that only last a few seconds, but it's night and day between those two. And just in that clip, you can see the awkwardness on display, the bizarre verbal tics and elocutions on display, the kind of golly gee forced cackling that's really going to be a bad look for her if she can't suppress it. But again, based on the current ads and the speeches she's given so far, it looks like she is capable of suppressing it.
One good thing, well, another good thing Kamala has going for her right now, she gets to pick a running mate. And I think going second is a huge advantage in this regard. Donald Trump will get to JD Vance in a little bit. I don't think that was a great pick. But Kamala, the Democrats actually have a pretty strong bench, at least as it appears to be. Some of these folks have not been vetted to the degree that you would need to be in a presidential ticket. But I want to just show you, I think there's probably 6 to 8 people on the so-called short list. I've got 3 here that I want to look at. The first is probably my pick, Josh Shapiro. He's the governor of Pennsylvania. But I want to show you this clip. This is from right after the attempted assassination attempt on Donald Trump's life, which of course happened in Pennsylvania. This is from a press conference that Governor Shapiro held in the wake of that.
We lost a fellow Pennsylvanian last night, Corey Comparator. I just spoke to Corey's wife and Corey's 2 daughters. Corey was a girl dad. Corey was a firefighter. Corey went to church every Sunday. Corey loved his community. And most especially, Corey loved his family. Corey was an avid supporter of the former president and was so excited to be there last night with him in the community. I asked Corey's wife if it would be okay for me to share that we spoke. She said yes. She also asked that I share with all of you that Corey died a hero, that Corey dove on his family to protect them last night at this rally. Corey was the very best of us. May his memory be a blessing.
Wow. I have to tell you how refreshing that is. That's a leader. That is a leader. What do you think?
No, I agree. I mean, that's only a clip of the speech, but if you watch the whole thing, it really is fantastic. And I'm sure we both can disagree with the majority of Shapiro's policy priors and still think that a presence like that, it's interesting because when we were discussing who Trump was going to pick as his VP, you were convinced it was going to be Vance for almost all along. You were right. I was wrong. I begrudgingly admit, as much as it pains me.
No. I would love to take credit for being right. My recollection is that I was leaning Doug Burgum.
I remembered you didn't want it. My memory is you didn't want it to be Vance, but you thought Vance was the likely outcome. I'm trying to do you a favor, Matt. I'm trying to make you seem like a prognosticator.
Well, I think I might have said like all the evidence this week is pointing toward Vance, but I'm sticking with my original pick, Doug Burgum. But whatever the case, I will accept it. I was right. You were wrong.
Yeah, don't throw that away, Matt. That should be on your business card. But I think I remember when we were discussing that, I repeatedly made the point, but I thought Burgum would be a better pick than Vance because Burgum could bring an air of moderation and a perception of, good sense and discipline to Trump's campaign that the Trump campaign sorely needed if it was going to edge out Biden. Trump didn't go in that direction. I'm sure we'll come to that shortly. But now it's interesting because Kamala Harris, as an extension of everything that's happened with Biden's administration in recent weeks, also is stands out as a chaotic candidate. She does not represent order and stability. Look at just look at what's happened with how the disastrous Biden debate went and how it led us to this point. and how for years now Kamala and her ilk were trying to cover up everything that was going on with the president of the United States, even though everyone could recognize it because people aren't stupid. I think it's quite difficult for her to make the argument that she's really on the side of democratic norms and conventions and customs in light of everything that's happened and in light of what the Democrats are trying to do now by making her the nominee. But if she can bring forward someone like Shapiro, who seems poised, who seems more moderate, who seems more dignified and respectable, that could be a big, VP picks are never all that, aren't necessarily ever all that consequential, but it could only be a benefit to her campaign if she makes the right one.
Now, Josh Shapiro, I don't know if he's very popular, I understand, in Pennsylvania, moderate Democrat. Certainly comes across as a great guy. Some people are saying because he's Jewish, that could actually be a strike against him because Kamala needs to also win Michigan. But who knows? I think he's my pick if it were up to me. Another possible pick is Andy Beshear. He's the governor of Kentucky. Unlike Josh Shapiro, where he's governor of Pennsylvania, that's obviously a very important state, I don't think Kamala is going to win Kentucky. But Andy Beshear has this rural red state vibe that Shapiro doesn't have. Let's go to the clip.
As vice president, you undoubtedly would be able to help your own people. So are you at least open to the possibility of being a running mate to Vice President Harris?
Well, I think if somebody calls you on that, what you do is at least listen. And I want the American people to know what a Kentuckian is and what they look like, because let me just tell you that JD Vance ain't from here. Now, the nerve that he has to call the people of Kentucky, of Eastern Kentucky, lazy. Listen, these are the hardworking coal miners that powered the Industrial Revolution, that created the strongest middle class the world has ever seen, powered us through 2 world wars. We should be thanking them, not calling them lazy. And so today was an opportunity to both support the vice president, but also to stand up for my people. Nobody calls us names, especially those that have worked hard for the betterment of this country.
You can tell there Beshear has the just cultural signifiers, rural, accent, not going to be portrayed as some liberal elite. He's obviously got sharp elbows. He's willing to go on the attack, obviously, and attack JD Vance. I don't think JD Vance ever actually called Kentuckians lazy, but you could extrapolate that from reading Hillbilly Elegy, I guess. But what'd you make of that?
I think picking a plucky good old boy to animate Heartland voters like that could be a good. I don't think it's going to be Beshear, but I think it could be a good idea considering Vance is deeply unpopular by all recent opinion polling, which I'm sure we'll come to in a second when we start looking at some of the clips involving him lately.
So, who knows who Kamala will pick? There's Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan. There's Pete Buttigieg, the Secretary of Transportation. But I wanted to show you this last clip here. This is sort of a dark horse long shot candidate, Tim Walz. I believe he's the governor of Minnesota. He's older, so you don't get the generational change message that you might get with Beshear or Shapiro. But I was impressed seeing this guy on MSNBC, how quick he is and how tough he is. And let's watch the clip.
These are weird people on the other side. They want to take books away. They want to be in your exam room. That's what it comes down to. And don't, get sugarcoating this. These are weird ideas. Listen to them speak. Listen to how they talk about things. Listen to how your previous guests were right. Like you said, they've told them that they shouldn't talk about race. They can't help it. It is built into their DNA because there is no plan. There's no health care plan. There's no health care plan. There's nothing to do on this. They want to take away our alliances and leave Russia to do whatever they want. Look, they are bad on foreign policy. They are bad on the environment. They certainly have no health care plan. And they keep talking about the middle class that, as I said, a robber baron real estate guy and a venture capitalist trying to tell us they understand who we are. They don't know who we are.
That guy's tough. I mean, he's throwing some elbows. I mean, he's playing on home turf, friendly confines of MSNBC there, but he's he's coming after him.
Yeah, no, that's a good line. I think it's a long shot purely because age has been such a prevailing issue of this entire election cycle that unfortunately the gentleman is perceptibly old. And I think Kamala and the Democrats are going to want to distance themselves from that. And like you said, Matt, build a run on a ticket that delivers what Biden very awkwardly tried to promise in his address last night, where he said that he is stepping down to enable generational change, as if anyone really buys that reasoning. But nonetheless, if that's what the Democrats want to push, then picking a younger and pluckier VP pick, I think, will be what Kamala goes for and what will ultimately work out best for her.
Well, Donald Trump did go with a younger pick, but as you've suggested, Guy, one that's not necessarily working out so great. JD Vance, you know, I don't know if he's going to become the Dan Quayle or the Sarah Palin, but his numbers are actually worse. Let's go to the tape.
It's a negative net territory. Look at that, -6 points. I will tell you, Aaron, I have gone all the way back since 1980. He is the first guy after immediately following a convention, a VP pick, who actually had a net negative favorable rating. That is underwater. The average since 2000 is +19 points. JD Vance making history in the completely wrong way.
I mean, it's amazing. +19. And I know people talk VPs don't usually matter, but they're usually
Usually
at least
they're
not
pretty
a negative.
popular. Usually they're popular. In this case, he's dragging Trump down.
All right. And then there's also Ohio, which I, have been around long enough to have been there on an election night. And the reason I was there, because the person who wins Ohio wins the White House.
Right.
Ohio's a red state now.
Yeah.
So what does the JD Vance pick do for Trump? Obviously, he is senator from Ohio.
There's this whole idea, JD Vance is, going to help out in Ohio, perhaps help out in those Rust Belt, those Great Lake battleground states. But if you look at Ohio, JD Vance won in 2022, but he only won by 6 points. That's worse than Donald Trump did in 2020. It's far worse than Mike DeWine did in 2022. He was the worst performing Republican candidate in 2022 up and down the ballot in the state of Ohio. He had nothing there.
All right, so Trump does very well with white working class voters. That's one of his superpowers. So what does Vance add?
Yeah, what does Vance add? Look, he won white working class voters. He won white voters without a college degree in the state of Ohio. But pretty much every Republican wins white working class voters. And if you look here, again, the margin that Vance put up was the weakest performance of any major Republican. It's worse than Trump did in Ohio. It's worse than Mike DeWine did in Ohio. The J.D. Vance pick makes no sense from a statistical polling perspective, Aaron.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right. So that was Harry Denton talking to Aaron Burnett from CNN. We heard a second ago the Governor Walz of Minnesota. And early on in that clip, he's talking about how they're weird. He's talking about Republicans. They're weird. They got these weird ideas. It seems like J.D. Vance has some of these weird right-wing ideas, these sort of a Tucker Carlson, Donald Trump Jr., Sohrab Ahmari, post-liberal kind of guy. I think Trump picked him at a time when Trump thought Biden was the opponent and that Trump would coast to re-election easily. But now that the race maybe is tightening and that Kamala has this excitement, I'm not sure that the J.D. Vance pick looks all that smart.
I think part of the problem is the ideas. I think if you look at the content of the speech he gave at the convention, a lot of those ideas, those notions of protectionism, of foreign policy restraint, of distancing ourselves, of becoming more isolated than the world at a time when the world is in deep turmoil, are simply not. Most people simply don't ally with those views. And a lot of people, I think, also, if they're still proud of this country in some kind of fundamental way, even though they might not like how the country is being run and who is representing it on both sides of a political aisle, I think a lot of people also don't buy into this idea that America isn't, to a very real extent, an idea and a creed, and that much of the essence of America comes from that kind of ideology. Of course, America is a nation. You can't get away from that. But all of this strange nationalistic talk, I don't think cuts much ice with most people. I don't think most people really understand it or see where it's coming from. Thankfully, the majority of the human race, unlike us, Matt, don't know what national conservatism is or what post-liberalism is or what all of these weird into this, what all of these weird debates going on the right are, or why and don't think they matter. But I think what people will respond to is the fact that Vance seems slimy. He seems opportunistic, and also, crucially, he seems bullish. He's a polished speaker, but he still seems bullish, seems aggressive, seems pugnacious. George Will had a really good column the other day where he made the point that Trump's best option, going back to our advocacy of Bergam, would have been a quieter voice, a voice that could, to use Biden's phrasing, right, lower the temperature. And instead, he brought another loud voice into the room who wasn't even particularly well liked or well respected to begin with. And unsurprisingly, his numbers have not increased since then.
Well, look, he could have had Rubio, he could have had Burgum, he could have had Nikki Haley if he wanted to win these suburban women. Instead, he picks JD Vance, and something has resurfaced where JD Vance, I think, will really turn off some suburban women.
Questioning the leadership abilities of people without kids was already getting blowback.
We're effectively run in this country via the Democrats, via our corporate oligarchs, by a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives and the choices that they've made, and so they want to make the rest of the country miserable too. And it's just a basic fact. You look at Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, AOC, the entire future of the Democrats is controlled by people without children.
Actress Jennifer Aniston sharing Vance's comments with her 44 million Instagram followers, writing, "I truly can't believe this is coming from a potential VP of the United States."
I saw conservative women saying, I had an ectopic pregnancy, or I wasn't able to get pregnant. This isn't just, they don't just feel like they're being criticized intellectually or philosophically. This is an emotional attack, an emotional issue for some, I'm sure men and women, but particularly women. How much do you think this is going to hurt Vance?
Well, I think, first of all, this is a consequence of Vance being terminally online, which we know for a fact he is, because not only has it been documented, but he's professed it proudly and admitted to it on multiple occasions. And when you're terminally online and immersed in a lot of these strange, these bizarre, like, new right, anti-American, strange dark enlightenment Twitter circles and so on, you lose all sense of reality and decorum. And we've seen this happen to many people. Vance is just the latest example of it, and his rhetoric there perfectly exemplifies that. I think it absolutely, even if it doesn't significantly diminish the Trump ticket's appeal to female voters, it obviously can't help them. It isn't going to be an asset. At best, it's not going to make a difference. At worst, it's going to be a serious hindrance. And again, when this race is going to come down to a knife in every regard and among every crucial voting bloc, Trump can't afford any mistakes. And picking this sort of bomb-throwing, provocateur of a VP pick was probably not the best idea when you're trying to thread a very carefully thread a needle in the final days of a campaign.
Speaking of people who are too online, this is a family show, but I do have a question. Are you familiar with the Hawk Tuah girl?
I think. But do
you know what that is? Let's not talk about it. You can Google it if you're listening, and certainly if you have kids in the car, we're not going to get graphic here. But
right.
But the reason I ask, well, let's just go to the tape, because there was I'm not going to mention this person's name. It doesn't even matter. But this is an interview on Fox Business, and it will give you a sense of the way some on the right are attacking Kamala Harris.
Yeah, and then there's the DEI press secretary telling you that the DEI vice president is the future of the party here. And so the future looks kind of dim for the Democrats here, but this is no shocker either. Kamala Harris, she's the original Hawk Tuah girl. That's the way she got where she is. And the party's going downhill if it's in her hands.
That was tough. That was harsh.
That was harsh. So they're calling her a DEI pick. That's diversity, equity, and inclusion. Essentially accusing her of being a affirmative action choice for president. And then saying that she got to the top by her feminine wiles, I suppose. I think this is really going to backfire. These, are there elements of truth? I don't know. Is it smart politics? Absolutely not smart politics.
I think that clip is priceless because he clearly thought that line clearly sounded a lot better in his head, and then as soon as he said it, you could tell he regretted it. I think look, like you said, Matt. Whatever you think about Kamala's rise to power, at this point, it doesn't matter. What matters is how if you want her to lose or if you want Trump to win, how is Trump going to fight against it? And I think you're absolutely right. This is not the way to do it, especially at a time when the coarsening of public discourse, the coarsening of the Republican Party in particular, has been a major off-putting factor to again young people, women, a lot of the more tractable voting blocks in American life in recent years. This sort of rhetoric is juvenile. It's completely unbecoming. It's foolhardy again in such an unstable race. I think I think it also is ridiculous when the line of attack, the best line of attack to use, is quite clear, which is that Harris was complicit in essentially pulling a royal scam on the United States for the last 3 years by covering up by pretending that all of Biden's obvious deficiencies weren't there, presumably knowing that she'd be able to swoop in like this in the end.
There's the line of attack. You can also tie her to inflation, the Afghanistan withdrawal. You could talk about the Green New Deal and fracking. There's a lot of substantive issues where Kamala, or
the border,
things like defunding the police. Even, I mean, let's go through her 2020 campaign. I'm sure there's a lot of radical left-wing things she said that are fair game. But look, the problem that Republicans have is the perverse incentives in this attention economy. There are incentives to say outrageous things and get attention. And so you're going to have some people that are just sort of right-wing provocateurs doing that. But look, JD Vance is not some rando. He talked about the cat lady thing and even called Kamala Harris that. This is from a couple years ago when he was running for Senate in Ohio. So I do think there'll be a backlash.
I mean, to your first point, Matt, let's not forget that on paper, right, the Republican Party is supposed to be the party of constitutional principles and traditional constitutional norms. You and I are both old enough to remember, I think, in 2019, when Kamala's whole campaign was based on seizing power from Congress through the executive branch to eliminate private health care. Eliminate, I believe, was the precise word she used. To seize and confiscate firearms. To completely overhaul immigration. To seize patents from people. This is I find it very difficult to believe that her approach to a lot of these issues and her perspective on the presidency and the nature of the executive branch has changed much in the last 5 years, nor have her intentions if she comes to power. That again, I think everything you say is, I think that is an obvious avenue for Republicans to exploit. And what's also an obvious avenue for Republicans to exploit is everything you just said about how she's an emblem of all of the policy failures of the Biden administration in recent years. The weakening, the perceived weakening of America on the global stage, continued inflation and rising prices and a rising and unsustainable cost of living, rising housing costs, and so on. If Republicans can't simply mount even some pretense of having an agenda and having an alternative to that can fix a lot of those problems, and all they have to offer is that kind of bluster and bellicose behavior that we saw in that clip and that we've seen from Vance and Trump, then it's going to blow up in their face. And honestly, it might be the best outcome for all of us if it blows up in their face and Trump's campaign goes down in flames again because he can't control himself.
Well, that's the thing. Dave McCormick, the Republican Senate candidate in Pennsylvania, put together this pretty good ad taking Kamala Harris to task for her past positions. But I think it's more likely that Donald Trump, who doesn't talk that much about philosophy or policy differences, but he's a vibes candidate. I think it's more likely that he is going to get sucked into attacking her on race, making sort of racist and sexist remarks about her. And I think that is a huge mistake, but Trump seems like destined to make it.
I think that's entirely right. Destined to make it, I think, is precisely right. And again, I think the way around that is instead of making crude jokes about her race or about her gender, which it is highly likely Trump will fall into at some point during one of his rallies as he gets carried away, the right attack is, look, Kamala's corrupt. Kamala tried to fool all of you. Look at what Kamala represents. Kamala is just an extension of everything I stood against before and everything you were supporting me against until Biden stood down last week. Don't give in to this. Don't be taken in by the lie. Vote for change. Vote for renewal. Right? But will he actually be able to? Will he actually be able to pull that off and maintain it? I'm skeptical.
All right. So a lot of folks on the right seem to be maybe not fully appreciating this energy and excitement that Kamala Harris has, and they don't see it as organic. Here's one clip, Ben Shapiro talking about it.
Exactly do her qualifications look like other than, again, the sort of intersectional magic of Kamala Harris and the fact that Democrats have to manufacture enthusiasm for, I've never seen this much manufactured enthusiasm for anyone outside of maybe Taylor Swift's last album. It's amazing.
Yeah, me neither. It's so obvious. You cringe when you see it.
Say what you will about Taylor Swift and the Swifties, but it may or may not be a good thing, but it's not phony. It's not manufactured. This is organic. But Ben doesn't necessarily have the best track record when it comes to understanding this particular demographic.
I don't think the manufactured enthusiasm point is necessarily wrong, but as opposed to what? No enthusiasm at all on the Trump side?
I don't get manufactured. These Democrats were hungry for something different after Joe Biden. I think this is spontaneous, and I don't think this is, to me, this is like a real desire for something to be excited about.
I think what he's driving at is that I think he's driving at the point that Harris is deeply unpopular and has always been deeply unpopular and has been deeply unpopular for her entire tenure as vice president. But no, again, I think you're right. People, that's sort of irrelevant. That's sort of redundant that's sort of redundant when you consider that people were simply just sick of Biden and desperate for Biden to step down and desperate for any kind of alternative to Trump that actually seemed somewhat sentient or alive. And now they have it. And going back to what we started with, if Harris, even if Ben isn't wrong about a lot of that initial enthusiasm and a lot of the bedrock of the campaign being manufactured, if Harris can build something real and something organic off of that and play her cards correctly, that's going to be a genuine earned win in a difficult election that no one will be able to take away from her, even if, like us, you completely disagree with most of the policy positions.
So Ben thought Taylor Swift's excitement was manufactured. He thinks the same thing about Kamala. This is what he had to say about the movie Barbie.
Week one, this thing is going to clean up at the domestic box office. My prediction is going to just absolutely fall off a cliff after that. The repeat business on this movie is going to be non-existent because it was written by two people who are so smug and self-satisfied, and Greta Gerwig and Noah Baumbach, that they have no audience.
Ben is a smart guy. I don't think he understands this particular demographic.
Right, and I think Ben gets a little too carried away on cultural issues like this when he's very clearly just out of his depth and out of his element.
I think I have a better sense of what these women want. Am I Mel Gibson?
Yes, The Passion of the Christ 2, I'm sure will be a big hit.
Anyway, no, I don't know if you remember, there was a Mel Gibson movie before all the scandals where he could hear what women were thinking.
I didn't know about this.
No, this was before your time. But trust me, it's a superpower. It is a superpower. Clearly, Ben does not have the Mel Gibson that gift.
What was the movie called? This is news to me.
It might be called What Women Want. It's one Google search away.
Anyone curious can look it up, I guess.
I don't think I hallucinated this. This could all be in my imagination, but it is that time again. It's cold gin time again. And Guy Denton, you know what that means? It means you drive us wild. We drive you crazy. Anything that I got wrong? Anything? Let me ask you this before we go. I didn't ask you this. Who should Kamala Harris pick for her Veep? And who will she pick for her Veep?
You know, I think no one's really talking about Whitmer. I think Whitmer has probably more assets than a lot of people are giving her credit for. But at the same time, I don't know if she's the strongest choice. I think either Shapiro or Kelly would ultimately have a lot of the same kind of impact. I think it's likely that she goes with Shapiro. I don't think that would really be a mistake. I think I'm not convinced that. I don't think Buttigieg would be a good idea, but I also don't think the Buttigieg thing is going to happen. I think he's going to take stock and work on building a 2028 campaign. I think most likely she will make the correct choice because there simply aren't that many options to choose from, and most of the options really aren't bad or have some kind of incentive for being chosen in one way or another, which was not the case. Which was not the case with Trump picking a VP. As long as none of these candidates shoot a dog behind their house and beneath the gaze of construction workers, I think most of them will be fine choices for Kamala's end.
And you mentioned Mark Kelly, the senator from Arizona, whom I didn't mention earlier, but he's definitely in the mix, and we could do a lot worse than an astronaut senator from a border state who's obviously the husband of Gabby Giffords. So we'll see what happens, and maybe the decision will be made and a million other things will happen between now and the next time we talk. But Guy Denton, always a pleasure.
I like to think it's doing these podcasts doing these shows that have jinxed American political life, Matt, and made it so that every week a whole cavalcade of insanity has to happen just so we have enough things to talk about on Fridays.
Things have only got worse since we came to the wrong place at the wrong time and started doing the wrong stuff. And we'll see you back here next week. Have a good one, Guy.
Thank you, Matt. Good to see you. If you like what you heard here today, please make sure to follow the show, subscribe to the show, leave a like, review the show wherever you get your podcast, and also please smash that like button, or whatever the people my age are saying. I don't know. I am a Kiss fan after all. But nonetheless, you can also follow us on X at WrongStuffPod, or drop us a note. Fawning praise or scornful disdain, we accept both, at thewrongstuffpod, all one word, at gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening. We're looking forward to next time.